just need to say that Omnistruct is, oh, they can hear us now.
I gotcha. I do not see Rebecca yet.
Hey, Rebecca, can you hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay? I just changed some sound settings.
Yes, sounds great.
Sure can.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think one of our panelists is having a bit of some challenges. Sam, are we live?
We sure are.
Perfect. All right. Welcome, everybody. We have a great topic today that I have to get. Before I introduce the topic, I have to get some of the legalities out of the way. We've left the disclosure up on the screen for people to review, but the main thing is that Omnistruct is a certified activity provider speaker for the California Bar Association, all of that legal stuff, and you can see the website. This is an educational roundtable and is not authorized for CalBAR CLE credit. George, is there anything else I needed to say in that disclosure, just out of curiosity?
I don't think so. We generally include the disclosures for folks that are just need to be aware that of our certifications. So yeah, we're good to go.
Perfect. And I'll make introductions in just a minute, but thank you for everybody coming. This is an extremely important topic that we get questions about all the time across the board, and that is the legally defensible position and leveraging continual compliance for evidence and proof, which we'll get deeper into through our panelists. But first of all, let me introduce the two that are on right now. I think our third panelist is having technical issues, as I have said. But today we have Omnistruct CEO George Usi. And George, I'll let you just tell a little bit about yourself, and then I'll move into the next panelist.
Sure. I'm George Usi. I am one of the founders of Omnistruct. I got my career started in the internet backbone standards and management side of the house, working for Nippon Telephone and Telegraphic, NTT. And I've been in what essentially is the cybersecurity and networking and risk management fields for some 20-something plus years, standards, of course. So thanks everybody for having for joining us, and special thanks to our guests
Yeah.
who've joined us as well.
Yeah. And so I'm going to get into our next esteemed guest from AGRC Partners. We have Christopher Isham. Christopher, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Isham with Annapolis GRC Partners. We provide compliance consulting for ethics, anti-bribery, sustainability, and data privacy. We do that through our two brands, which is GRC 24 and Privacy 24. We provide outsourced data protection officers and outsourced compliance officers, mainly for life science, healthcare, and health IT companies. But we're also in energy and engineering now as well.
Wow. That's a lot of industries. All right. Awesome. And I see our third esteemed panelist has made it. So thank you so much. We have Rebecca Radoski from Xpan Law. Rebecca, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. Sorry I was late. I was having some technical difficulties, always a fun time. So I am an attorney licensed in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. My law firm is a boutique law firm focusing exclusively on cybersecurity and data privacy. We work with organizations in a variety of industries, healthcare, finance, nonprofit, legal, or union and pension fund, Taft-Hartley fund, the gaming industry. So a variety of industries, anything that's highly regulated. I'm also an adjunct professor at Drexel's Klein School of Law, teaching enterprise risk management, cyber law, and international data privacy with an emphasis on the general data protection regulation.
Fantastic. So we have this great group here to talk about evidence and proof. And today, what we're going to do is we will have some topics that we will throw at our panelists, and as we go through those things, if you have any questions, please chat them, and we will get to them in a Q&A session at the very end. And so we're just going to dive right into it today. And I'm going to ask the first question that has been burning in my mind. And that is, what are the most common pitfalls that you see organizations fall into when they're trying to actually establish a legally defensible position? And honestly, how can that be avoided? But I'm going to add a third one on there. Just when they're just an understanding of the legally defensible position. Like some don't even understand this, right? So maybe dial it back just a little bit. So who wants to chime in on that?
Rebecca, I'll let you.
Oh, Christopher's already throwing me under the bus.
See?
No. I will jump in. I frequently talk to organizations about creating a legally defensible position. And the reason I use that expression or that phrase as opposed to saying a secure position or a compliant position is because compliance and security and are illusory within a larger organization. And frankly, they're illusory in smaller organizations. They're very difficult to achieve. And in one moment, you could be compliant and secure, and the very next moment, you could be the opposite. So the point is to demonstrate through your policies, procedures, your contractual language in your various agreements that you are making more than a good faith effort to establish, to show that you are doing what you were supposed to be doing under the law. I think that a lot of organizations struggle with this because they are subject to so many laws. They don't understand the data they are collecting and dealing with. And so it gets very confusing. And because of that, they either find themselves in one of two positions. We throw a ton of technology at it and spend a fortune, or we ignore it and pretend like it's not going to happen. And then there's a whole, gray area in the middle of companies doing a variety of things. But creating a legally defensible position means you've given me enough so I can go into a court of law and stand there in good faith and say to the court, they did everything they were supposed to be doing, and bad stuff happens anyway. And that's kind of the watered down version of it, if you will.
I like the watered down version because I need the watered down version of it. I think that that's one of the biggest challenges out there is the thought process behind being able to defend. We talk about kind of the financial statements being snapshots in time, but there's so many laws changing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time that if there is an incident, can you defend what you were doing at that time? And I find that the majority are sweeping it under the rug. I know that there's others that are actively but it's like, this is a nice to have versus an actual have to have. So anyways, but how can we avoid this? That's one of the things that with so many laws, seriously, how do we avoid this?
That's true. It's difficult to avoid. But as I tell my clients, and people hear me say this all the time, it's not if, it's when. And when it happens, you had better be prepared. That there's no making documents in the back room when the auditors are at your offices. It's all comes down to, I think some of the important topics are data mapping for data privacy and making sure that you're on top of that and you just don't do it once and then say, oh, well, we did it 2 years ago during our DPIA. Here it is, because your data changes. It's staying on top of that. And also training and retraining, and being able to have proof of that. That is, it's not just, hey, go watch this video. It has to be documented. You need the evidence, and retraining as well. If you have an incident and you have a CAPA, retraining is part of that CAPA process, and documenting that so that you have the evidence that, yes, we had an incident, but this is what we did to correct it, and this is what we're doing to prevent it in the future, and this is how we retrained the person or persons involved in the incident.
Yeah. And yet we hear all the time, I don't have budget. I'm just going to throw that out there to the panelists, because that's a pushback you get all the time. I don't have budget for that. I'm small. I can't do this.
Yeah,
pay now or pay a lot more later.
I was just going to say, Christopher, you can, if you're going to pay on one way or the other. Like, it's coming, it's happening. And what I can tell you is, as an attorney who represents people and organizations on their absolute worst time of their life, i.e. post data breach, it is a horrific, nonstop smorgasbord of fees that they are thrown at. And I'm not just talking about the legal fees here, because, obviously I'm defending companies. Like, we're not initiating the lawsuits, right? We are being sued. And so it's how, it's the legal costs, it's the discovery, it's the investigations, because every AG's office in the country practically opens an investigation whenever there's a data breach. Now, in varying degrees of they come in and do a deep dive, but depending on the data, they really can, you can be subjected to quite an ordeal. And being able to demonstrate what you've done throughout the process and the training that you've done and the policies you have in place, how you've operationalized that. I mean, it's actually a lot more expensive not to do it than to do it. So and even if you're not, say, look, I can't spend $1 million this year. I can't spend $5 million on this year. You need to start allocating and taking that a piece at a time, because the sooner you start the process, the less painful it will be.
Yeah, and I would emphasize as well that there's plenty of reliable data out there from some of the different governing bodies of many of the certifications that individuals can achieve, so that you're going to spend 50% less than others if you actually are prepared with a proper risk treatment plan. And risk treatment is really the shift. We often say that cybersecurity has been a ground war, whack-a-mole, fought in the trenches for 52 years, and we're losing. A new war has emerged. It's more of an air war, and it consists of the risk treatment side of the legally defensible position, and the inevitability of a compromise. And so if you're not prepared for when the hacker succeeds, then you're probably going to be in a much worse position. And more importantly, if you can demonstrate and show evidence of the things that you've done in order to prepare, you're in a much better position otherwise than the reactive model, as we like to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one of the things that also we get questions all the time about, and I may be throwing everybody for a loop here, but I have car insurance, but years ago in Los Angeles, nobody wanted to have car insurance because it was something that was hedging your bets, right? And I'm finding that a lot of small business, and of course that designation is under 500 million in the United States, but I'm talking micro, right? Many of them say, yeah, this is just too darn expensive. I'll roll the dice. And so how are you guys dealing with that? How, in your organizations, what can you tell the listeners?
I think that's a tough spot because somebody who's willing to gamble, it's going to be hard to talk them out of it. You can show them, oh, this company got this fine, this company got this fine, but then they look and they go, oh, well, you're telling me about Google and about Meta. What about a little guy like me? I have 25 employees, and until it really hits them in the pocket, it's hard to say, well, you could get a $2 million fine, you could get a $150,000 fine, or in the state of California, you get a $7,500 fine. But it goes beyond just regulations and fines. I believe that the compliance goes into your sales and marketing as well. It's a branding issue. It's something that I want to do business with a company that's ethical, that protects my data, and has policies and procedures in place to make sure that myself, the consumer, is feeling good about my purchase. And I think that can be used in such a way to say, hey, it's not just about fines and regulations. I know this is the legally defensible talk, but let's not get there.
Well, and the other thing too is people make the mistake of thinking it's just the data that they're after. They're after a quick buck, right? And when they're breaking into your system, they don't care how they make that money. I actually had a client where they had a lot of things in place to protect them, and they transferred over $1.5 million inadvertently to a hacker's account. Now, luckily they got in touch with me immediately. We put the wheels in motion with Secret Service and FBI and things like that, and we were actually able to make a full recovery for them. But there was a weekend where the CEO was vomiting profusely because he knew he wasn't going to be able to make payroll. So I know we think about data breaches in terms of the data and it's somebody else's information, but it's also your business. And that's what I try to tell clients. I agree with Christopher that if you're going to not do it, you're not going to do it. And there's nothing I can say that's going to make you, right? It's like a child taking their medicine. They're like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But because of the position I play in this crazy world we live in, I get to see, I get the phone calls of, I can't make payroll because a hacker stole my money, and my entire business is going to go under. And that's what companies don't really see. Even when they have cyber insurance, they go, it goes really quickly. People don't realize how quickly it goes. And then then what? Then it's coming out of pocket. So, but when it happens to you, trust me, you're going to be puking your guts out till all hours of the night in the bathroom because it's of what's going on. It is a horrifying experience. I can't, and then until you've gone through it and run that gauntlet, you don't really appreciate how horrific it truly is for the organization and how time consuming it is.
Yeah, definitely.
And every minute you're not doing business, you're losing dollars as well. I mean, it's not about them taking the money; it's about them shutting down your business as well. I mean, I have drug companies in phase 2 clinical trials right now. They're going to phase 3, and that's $160 million plus to move to phase 3. And if they're down for 2 weeks because their systems are down because somebody went in and froze everything, that's millions of dollars a day.
Yeah.
I think an interesting thing to also consider is the there's this supply chain factor happening where now if you're going to get a contract or if you're going to earn business or partner with a brand, they're going to want you to prove you have a legally defensible position already. So for some of you, it's going to mean lost sales, and nobody wants their revenue impacted. And we're not talking net new sales alone. You may have existing contracts or clients where you have that issue. And so I think that's Rebecca's point was if you get started now and you start dealing with this issue now, not only are you going to be prepared for that, what essentially is really a revenue blocker for you, but you're also going to be prepared for if the hacker does succeed in your environment and have that position that you need to defend yourself. And that's really the point of some of these new regulations. There's one in particular that I thought was quite interesting. It's called the Digital Operations and Resiliency Act in Europe. And we like to keep an eye on what's happening globally because we're living in an internet delivered world, folks. And the digital operational, or we call it DORA for short, but I'm going to have to keep saying it over and over again, is they're talking about a requirement where you have to report near misses when you have incidents rather than your actual incidents. And so this is only going to get more stringent in terms of what you have to do in operationalizing, but also in having that legally defensible position. The situation with DORA is you just will essentially be sanctioned, or you just simply won't be able to do business with those entities. So a lot of the clients that we have here in the US are looking at that very closely. And that particular, and there's tons of them. It's not just this one single act, there's many. This is just an example of what our future is probably going to look like.
And it's not just in Europe too. I mean, to George's point, the SEC came darn close, I think, to passing a regulation that said you had to report near misses, and there was a flurry in the industry of what is that going to mean, and what is that going to do to us? But when you look at Europe, it tends to be like weather moves east, while cyber and privacy regulations tend to move west. And so what we're seeing in Europe is almost always a precursor to what's about to happen here, mostly at the state level, but potentially with federal regulation as well.
Yeah. And I think a good way to look at it for some of you, if this is confusing in any way, you can really look to the car insurance industry where you can put a little gadget in your car that shows how you drive. Did you go too fast? Did you have a near miss? Right? The dash cams and the cameras. I mean, this is where we're probably headed. Of course, within reason, we're going to do our best to make sure that that's reasonable as industry experts and give our opinions of how we think things should be governed. And but in terms of decision making and those regulations, whether they're statutory or not, right? Because there's obviously lots of different influencers, but ultimately there's always a concern that if you don't have that defensible position, that you're just exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. So go treat that risk is what I think is the point. Or start treating it, show that you're addressing it.
Yeah.
When I've been listening to these comments, and I think of the book Atomic Habits and the 1% that he brings up, and anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go look up the book. It's fabulous. Anyway, so at this point, if we take small business and those would be the ones that were concerned about the budget part, and our topic, which is, leveraging continual compliance for evidence and proof. Let's give some key nuggets of some simple 1% ways to start to move an organization in that, and change that culture in creating that evidence and proof, and some quick tips and tricks, because you guys are all, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything quick, but you can take it in bite-sized. And so I would love to hear from the panelists on some of those, tips in order for them to take home and be able to start in that direction, just at least start.
Well, I'd be happy to start with what I think is an important convergence point between the ground war and the air war that I mentioned earlier. For those of you that have ever had an incident, and I hope that's not many of you, one of the things that sometimes has to happen is bringing what's called a DFIR, Digital Forensics Incident Response Certified Expert. And they're going to ask you for two things. And if you don't have those things, it's kind of difficult for somebody like Rebecca to do her job. They ask for your latest network map and your latest data map. So for you ground warriors out there, you technical folks, if you don't have those two things, right, then you're probably in a much worse position in supporting the actual situation of an incident. And that's going to come out in arrears of the incident. And that having that information is kind of that, I think that's why I call it the convergence point, because risk management often is not a ground war top of mind idea. We're just trying to stop the hacker in the ground war, but we're not prepared for when the hacker hacker actually succeeds, nor do we plan for it, that often. So just keep that in mind. I would start there.
Yeah, and to George's point, that information is going to be absolutely critical to building out a security and privacy program. And it's, of course, this isn't something you can do all at once, but having these maps and being able to overlay them over with one another is going to be really important to building out that program too. And I can say that when it happens, when the breach occurs, attorney general's offices are not saying, "Oh, take your time. Let us know when you figure this out," right? They want to know, you have 30 days, 60 days, 72 hours in Europe to report an incident. And they're not saying once you figure it out, let us know. They're saying as soon as you reasonably suspect that the data from our jurisdiction is impacted, we need to know that. That means that you're not going to know how many and things like that. You're just going to know that there's data from, Illinois or Connecticut or Maine or whatever. And if you don't have that data map, you're not going to have that information, and you are going to be late to notify. And that late notification is going to be a huge issue. And that's part of that quiver of defenses that you want. Like, we were on top of it. We had it. But the other thing I would say is you need a plan, an incident response plan. So to add to, what we're talking about, which is some simple things you can be doing now, having an incident response plan, having it printed out and ready to go. Or all of my clients, I keep an extra copy of their insurance policy and their incident response plan within my system and print it out in my office, so that if there is a problem and their systems are down, they can get a hold of me. Funny story is, I was driving to the supermarket, as one is apt to do after work, go pick up some stuff that you need for the next day. And I got a text message to my phone, which was the printout of the ransomware screen. Like, they took a picture of the ransomware screen because they couldn't get in. So they took a picture of it and sent it to my phone, and turned the car around, went home, got back into my office, loaded into, and started getting on calls. But so having that incident response plan in my office and having a copy of it was important, because they didn't have access to it. So data map, system map, breach response plan. Christopher, I'm sure you have some things to add to this as well.
Yeah.
Yes, let me unmute. The bells were going crazy outside of my house a second ago
Oh.
here. Oh, that's life in Italy.
I am
Um,
not feeling sorry for you.
No,
yeah.
me either.
Well, I think a comprehensive risk assessment is a great place to start, and identifying your risks and developing policies and procedures to mitigate those risks. That's where I usually start with my clients before I start any engagement. I do something like that, and if you already have a quality management system in place and you've done, say, let's say like an ISO 9001, then you're there. I mean, you're not there, but you're ready. You're ready to start building policies and procedures into your quality management system. And I 100% agree with Rebecca on the incident response plan. I mean, it's vital. Not just having the plan and making sure that people know their roles. It's practicing it as well. I go back to my days when I was working in data centers, doing compliant hosting in data centers, and we had DR plans, but we had physical DR plans as well. Earthquake, tornado. We were located near DC, so you understand we had acts of war response plans as well for DR, and each of us had our own job, a physical job during the disaster in the data center. So, and we practiced it, of course, because we hosted some government clients that couldn't go down.
That is, I think sometimes we don't digest all of the different stories that are running around out there and how something very simple can happen. And I remember being at a conference where we were talking about um, just how simple even it was. They were bringing up it was a university, and the university was bringing up that they have research, university students, nothing can go wrong with data with university students, right? And they were permitting students to take their own personal laptops home and do research, right? and of course that same laptop is being used for social media and a gazillion other things. And of course the DOJ comes down on the university and dealing with some of the most simple things that you don't think about on a regular basis would be just the fact that that is an entry point for a problem, right? I mean, you click on something you shouldn't. And again, if I remember my college days, I would have clicked on pretty much anything. And so I find it very, this sort of concept of simplicity of organizations not realizing some of the little things for changing the culture that would make it so that they would be legally defensible. And so, what are some of the ways that you guys have seen organizations start to shift the culture to this, what we have in the topic, continual compliance versus just, we're going to get to compliant. We're going to do this and we're done.
Well, from my perspective, I mean, I literally yesterday just did a training. And I know a lot of companies like their know-befores and their stuff where, but there's no substitute for being trained on your own policies and hearing from a professional how the experiences that they have. I find that it helps to change the mindset. You always get the naysayers in the crowd, and they're like, "Oh, come on, this is such a pain." Whatever. But it actually, you can almost see from the beginning of my training to the end of my training, this like evolution of how they're seeing things differently. And at the end, I always get the guy who's the gruffest, I don't like technology, I can't believe you're making me do this stuff, comes up to me and says, like, thank you. Like, I didn't even know half of this stuff, and it was eye-opening. Because people think about it in a very limited way, and they're viewing it through the lens of their experience. But when you really start to listen to other organization's experiences, I think it really drives it home how important this all is, and it is a culture thing. And creating that defensible position is not about arriving at a place, right? But it is literally the journey, and you're never arriving, because I will argue till I am blue in the face that there is no such thing as you are fully compliant. Compliance is an everyday get up and do it situation, because at any moment you can fall out of compliance because if somebody takes an action contrary to a policy, somebody does something they're not supposed to be doing, somebody makes an inadvertent mistake and clicks on something, you're out of compliance. Like you right there, you fell out. So compliance is an everyday thing, and bringing this to everybody's attention, at least, I like drip training throughout the year to keep it on top of mind, and then having annual or biannual training with a live person that makes them actually listen to what's happening. I find that to be much more effective than just, oh yeah, we do this every once in a while. And it also demonstrates compliance, because the drip training you get all the time, and then the twice a year training, everybody has to sit through whether they like it or not. But I think that's the special recipe, if you will.
Yeah, and I'm going to address the elephant in the room on this topic, which is, and I'm just training specifically, and that is the organizational culture. So depending upon if you're in your infancy stage, or what I call the go-go phase of a business, where where revenue is everything, and maybe you're sneaking things behind the finance team's back. Culturally,
No, they never do that.
culturally, the challenge is you may have people that don't believe in that the organization can execute on such a plan, albeit the culture may be broken, right? And so the smartest thing that can happen there is you have a tops-down approach. It has to start from the board to the CEO, and the CEO cascading down to the rest of the organization. And this is where, as Chris mentioned, the assessment or risk assessment becomes extremely valuable, because the board often doesn't understand their risk position. They count on the CEO to deliver it, and the CEO is probably too focused on the two things CEOs care about the most. Guilty. Increase revenues and decrease costs. Okay. And substantial risk is the third thing that I worry about. But but you have to, someone has to bring it up to you. And I think in the IT industry, and it's in the many years that I've been part of it, and bless these people, they're wonderful people. The challenge is that you don't always understand what risks and these new legal implications that you may not even know what they mean, or what they're about. And this is where having some kind of a legal regulatory assessment, or understanding the impact of the risks come into factor. And this is something best done under privilege with an attorney. So, and this is where you, as an IT person or a cybersecurity person, you can start to work more intimately with counsel, whether it's outside counsel or inside counsel. And so the cultural challenge is this may be something that, if it's not coming from the top down, and then it's going to be, it's not going to be as impactful, and people aren't going to do it. Even if you come up with the best risk assessment and the best plan, right? If people aren't on board culturally, it's going to be extremely difficult. So focus on starting at the right point in the organization, and if there are things that are broken culturally, this should be addressed. And I know there's probably a lot of you shaking heads out there. Oh, my organization is so broken, or we have A, B, and C problems. Hey, you're not alone, right?
Nope.
So it takes time. But this is often what we see as the greatest barrier, is when you don't have interdepartmental support, because it's not just the IT department anymore. It's not just the blinking lights folks, right? So it is the handling of sensitive information could be something very practical, like closing a door to a conference room when you're having company discussions about company secrets, right? That's not a digital problem, but that's an information security problem, not a cybersecurity problem. So those things and how the organization handles things become very important, and culturally, that's where we see a lot of the challenges. So, but there's answers, and we definitely know what those are.
It's so
Perfect.
true. We all hear the term culture of compliance, and no matter how many times you say it, doesn't make it true for your organization. You have to make it happen. And I feel that transparency in your compliance program with your staff, with your team members, is key. Not having them help you build policies and procedures, and not just going through training, but letting them know why we're doing this. People always love to work for companies that drive truckloads of water down to Florida when there's a hurricane, or build a women's and family shelter in their town. It's the same thing. Everyone wants to feel important, and if your role is made to be important, which every role is, every single person in the company is important to the success or failure of that company, and policies and procedures um, are a big part of that success, and making sure that they know that, and
Absolutely.
that every little movement can have repercussions. um, until maybe you don't understand it until you've sat through an audit and had the auditor go through your ticketing system and ask you, where's your change control for this ticket, can you show it to me right now? So
Yeah.
all about that.
Wow.
Um,
I heard from a hacker, a former hacker, and he said, we're all janitors mopping up right now. So every point is necessary for this. So thank you. George, I think you were going to comment before I interjected.
well, I think the kind of the pivotal point of all of this, from the culture to the training to the risk assessment, is that what Chris said, right? You have to have these things documented. So you got to build that thick file of proof, folks. I think we've all heard that before in our lifetimes, right? And that essentially is that documentation and that evidence of what you're doing and why you're doing it is why, continual compliance and even continual audit. How do you continually audit yourself? Right? Pass the audit, right? And then you're out of compliance a week later, and you're not back in compliance till the auditor comes back a year or two later. So this is where the process comes into play. So this is not project. This is a process, and all of the things we discussed, all of them, especially those of understanding risk treatment, really come down to, okay, so you understood your risk. Now what are you doing about it?
Right.
Right? So lawmakers are no longer satisfied with well, I didn't know position.
They were
They have
never
to,
satisfied with
Yes.
that.
And
know.
And it's easier now than ever before. I mean, I think we all are old enough to remember when an audit was rolling in a trolley full of binders, and now it's just giving them the login to your software, to your quality management system, or to your compliance software. It's a little easier. It's easier to document as well. If the guys in your knock are sick of writing, they don't have to anymore. They can just bring it right from their ticketing system right into the quality management system.
Yeah, it's definitely easier. But we used to say all the time shift happens with spreadsheets and different things, and that's a whole nother story. But you'd be surprised how many are still in file folders and spreadsheets for their for their monitoring. And there's nothing, if anybody
Sometimes that's what
has,
they can afford. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
they don't have they don't have the money for the tools and the software and things like that. And what I would say to those people is, if you don't have the money, like we're like laughing a little bit. It's like, oh, it's like analog, you're doing it. But if what you need is a spreadsheet, then use the spreadsheet. Like, don't say, oh, well, I can't afford the tool, so we're just not going to do anything. No, use the spreadsheet, right? Like, track it. It makes it harder. I'm not going to lie, but at least you haven't stuck your head in the sand. And somebody once told me even ostriches have to breathe. So like you can't breathe sand. So you're going to, at some point, you're going to have to be above ground. And so, you know, make sure that you're using the tools that you can afford. And when you can't afford them and you have to do it the old fashioned way, you know, you can still use a computer. It doesn't have to be on a piece of paper, but don't be afraid to do something.
I love that. Love that very much. And I think it's more reasonable than people even think. Having been through several of these things, you could go back in time and say, there's a lot of tools out there that you could manage that. And yes, there is the old Excel spreadsheet and Google Sheet that you can obviously manage and do something. I agree. Do something. But there is a lot to help today.
Yeah.
So, and I think one of the challenges, I remember going through an audit in the old days, not necessarily for cyber, but it becomes books of tracking and root cause and all sorts of things. And with some of the availability, if you take it a little at a time, like everyone has said, a little at a time, it does not become such a big, hefty lift when something does happen or when you have that questionnaire. Because right now, a lot have alluded to these questionnaires and a loss in revenue when you can't answer the questionnaires. And we're seeing a huge rise just in vendor risk for the same issues that we're talking about today. You know, they've got to prove that their third parties are also doing the evidence and proof and that they're compliant or they can't work for them. And so I am curious. I have, you know, I remember being part of a big hack, and I won't bring it up on this, but it was a retailer and it was a third party that caused, you know, just didn't realize that they caused an issue, you know? So how much are we seeing that on the rise and in the docket? And maybe that's kind of a dumb question, but to me, it's not. So.
Well, all right, I'll jump in again. Sorry. But I mean, I've worked with George for many years now, and I have been beating the third party drum for all of that time. I think people have just kind of started to wake. I don't want to say they've started to wake up. You know, it's like it's happening, and then like news media picks it up, and now it's like, oh, it's new. It's not new, right? Like it's always been less expensive and a bigger ROI for hackers to go after the vendor than it is to go after each individual company, right? So that's always been the case. We're just hearing about it more now. And the regulation, because the law is slow to catch up with the action, the regulations are now catching up, right? GDPR was kind of the first one that said, oh, you have to have contractual provision. Well, that's not true. HIPAA has been around for a long time. GLEB has been around for a long time. They've always had some sort of contractual obligations like business associate agreements like that and things like that. But GDPR was like really the first time where they said, well, we're not just going to ask you to like look at the contract. We're actually going to ask you to like prove it up through the third party. The vendor has to prove it up to you as part of the contractual provision. So you're marrying basically the technological provision with the contractual provision and the technological happening with the contractual provision. And you're saying, okay, now show me, right? Trust but verify is a phrase used frequently. And so, you know, you see it a lot now, you hear about it a lot now, but it's been around for a very long time. And third parties now, because the regulations are starting to require it, now these third parties are going, oh, I guess I need to do this, right? Like I need to have that assessment done. I need to have that audit done. What I think is also interesting is that you also have these regulations say it can't just be done by your internal IT or your risk management department or whatever. They want independence. So they're looking for you to bring in a third party to assess. They're looking for you to bring in a third party to audit because then you have that accountability as well. So we see that. And frankly, I mean, I get brought in a lot just for that reason. And for what George was talking about before is I get brought in because I can do those things. I can hire an expert and then it all gets covered by, you know, it's privileged to a point. And then, you know, what else, what we decide to disclose, but it's, the third parties are a huge issue, and companies need to be aware you have them and you are one. So you get to play both roles, and you get to torture and be tortured all at the same time. It's wonderful.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. In
Yeah.
the GRC 24 side of my business, where we do the ethics and ESG, that's been around a long time. Third-party vendor management systems have been, making sure that your buttons weren't made by 4-year-olds and things like that. Because if you're Costco and you're creating shirts and you're buying from all over the world, one 60 minutes interview over in Thailand could ruin your entire business. It almost took Nike down at one point, which now is one of the cleanest companies in the world. So third-party verification, actually, auditing your third parties, I think, is real important, and making sure that if you can't audit them, that they have the certifications and the evidence to back up their claims. I'm a big believer in certifications, because if self-certifying doesn't work for me, just saying there was a long time in HIPAA when there's no HIPAA certification. There's no, hey, I'm HIPAA certified, but you can say I'm HIPAA compliant. You can do high tech. You can do what's the HIPAA certification for software? I can't even remember. But there is some certifications for software products that contain PHI, but you as a company can't say, here's my HIPAA certification. I've seen so many people say, oh, we're HIPAA certified.
Yeah.
We're GDPR certified. I'm like, really? Who certified you? Which certifying body was that?
Exhibit A of they don't know what the heck they're talking about, right?
And love the trust me. Trust me. Okay. What about your entire organization? That's super
Yes.
interesting.
Well, that's the name of the HIPAA certification for software. It's high trust.
Yeah.
See, you mentioned one word, and
yeah. George, did you have any input or?
Oh, I always have input, but when I get talking, we'll be here for hours. So.
Well, we wouldn't want to do that because we are getting to the top of the hour, and we would like to open it up to some questions. I have definitely learned a lot on this panel, and I have very much appreciated all of you for coming in and sharing your expertise, especially with what's going on today. And so thank you so much. And I am going to open it up for some Q&A and I'm going to spend a second to look at the question portal. And if anybody listening wants to add some questions, that would be fabulous. And so I'll give them a second to do that. And this is always the Jeopardy theme song, right? Da, da, da. Who's going to be the question? Who's going to? All right. I do have one, and it may have been woven into this, and it is, can you provide examples of how a proactive versus reactive approach to compliance has impacted organizations during legal challenges? It's a great question.
That is a great question. So I'll start because I am frequently dealing with legal challenges. So what I can say is I have just this past year, I've represented two separate organizations, one that had a full compliance program and had a data breach, and one that had nothing and had a data breach. And what I will say is that the one that had the full program built out was much faster at responding to the breach, getting back up and running. And we have faced no regulatory challenges as yet. I will cross my fingers and knock on some wood there because I don't like to tempt fate. So in that situation, they were literally back up and running within 2 weeks, which seems like a long time, but for anyone who has gone through a data breach, it was actually quite fast. It was quick. The other organization took a very long time to respond took a very long time to get fully operational again. They are still struggling about a year and a half later with some systems that are not fully operational. They are being peppered with various notification letters of intent to pursue an investigation by attorney general's offices, and a couple of people have threatened to sue them. So you can see where, like, literally it was the tale of two cities and tale of two, one completely legally defensible, back up and running and moving, and the other one still bogged down in the quagmire of having nothing at the time. And so, I mean, from my perspective, just dealing with it as their attorney, it's very interesting to see that the extreme differences in how those organizations have responded. I will say that no two breaches are the same, so you're never going to have that. Like, that's not necessarily like just because they were back up and running into right. There's other factors that go into that. But in just terms of being able to move forward, you can see the difference that something like that makes. And it makes a big difference when you go to the lawsuit stage of it, which many of these cases do now. A lot of insurance companies are very quick to settle cases. I have never taken that approach. I like to challenge, because I'm like, why would I pay when I could challenge you and make you do what you need to do, which is prove your case. But, you can see that. And so, literally this past year, I've had that experience. So I hope that answers the question and is helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a great answer. It's about, if you live in a tornado area and you have your 150-year-old windows still, something's going to happen. But if you've gone and secured your house and built a cellar and made sure that your family can survive it, you're going to come through a lot better. I've seen two companies go under because they weren't compliant. They put in the bare minimum because they didn't want fines, but they didn't put an entire program in place that could really save their business. And I'm going to say it the exact same thing I said in the beginning. It's not if, it's when. It's going to happen. There's the best, most secure companies in the world with $100 million security budget. It happens to them. So of course it's going to happen to a 10, 15, 50, $100 million company.
And just because you're not hearing about it, like, the news media isn't picking up on it. But all you have to go on the Attorney General's website for data breaches, and you'll see the companies that have notified in that state. And it shows you it's not just these massive companies. Those are just the ones you hear about.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's not just Big Brother. Also, with GDPR, any European citizen can file an Article 15 against you.
Yep.
And it gets looked into by the European Commission. And so it's not just, oh, well, why are they going to care about me? All it takes is one of your clients to think that you mishandled their data.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. Holy crap. Sorry. It's one of those things that you look at it and you're like, oh, and we're not trying to obviously strike fear. We're trying to inform that,
Yes.
if it is that simple, and you kind of, I was thinking about actually, smaller companies are the targets because they are the ones that aren't really as prepped. So you go, back in the day, hackers they'd break windows at H&R Block to steal their hard drives, right? Back before all this was way a long time ago, right? And I was thinking about, really they go to the ones that are easiest, right? Have nothing set up. And so, yeah, very impactful for sure. I would like to end this roundtable. We have other questions, but we can answer them. I'd like to end this with each of you just kind of starting with Chris Isham. By the way, I apologize. I missaid his last name in the beginning, but I'd like you guys to each go around and tell where somebody could actually contact you for more information. And then we'll put that in the replay as well. So let's, and then I just give my thanks and gratitude for you guys spending your time on this very important topic today. Chris.
Great. Thank you. Well, my email is Chris, Chris.Isham, Isham at AnnapolisGRC.com. Of course, I'm also on LinkedIn. There aren't many Chris Ishams in the world, but there are more than you would think. But I just want to end by saying that compliance, being legally defensible or not legally defensible, it's the right thing to do, and making sure that you're running an ethical company in 2024 means taking care of your data, your employees' data, and your customers' data, also your vendors' data. I believe data privacy is part of ESG because privacy is a human right. It's listed under human rights, and data privacy falls under privacy. So it's not going away. 17 states in the U.S. have data privacy laws now. There's another bill right now in Congress that may or may not pass this year, but it's coming. And after the election, I think it's going to be a serious issue next year.
Thank you. All right. And then we'll move to Rebecca.
Thank you. I just want to thank Christopher and George and Valerie for having me. So you can reach me at Xpan Law Partners, R. Radoski at xpanlawpartners.com. Visit our website. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And again, I would echo everything Christopher said with regard to, what's happening in the world and privacy laws. But I'd also say that I think a misnomer is that it's just a tech problem. And I think it is actually, it's not a problem. If you look at it as this is something we can do to make our business stronger and to make our business better, because by doing this, a lot of times you identify things that are at issue and you can make your business stronger. But it isn't just tech. It's tech and law and HR and finance, and it's everyone working together. And creating that legally defensible position is going to be critical going forward. Companies that don't do it will not be companies going forward, because this is the new normal. This is the way the world is working, and we aren't disconnected. We're intrinsically connected, and that connectivity has a downside, and that downside is cybersecurity and data privacy issues. So embracing it, not being afraid of it, not being afraid to ask questions. I always tell people the tech questions are not stupid questions, but you just need the right interpreter. And so, get the right people in place, get a good legal team to help your tech people, get a good compliance people. Working together is going to be critical to moving forward.
Thank you. All right. And then thank you, Omnistruct, for hosting this webinar today. So I'm going to bring up the rear with George Usi from Omnistruct.
Thanks, Valerie. And, you can reach me at GUSI@omnistruct.com. And just remember, if you see cyber risk, you see UC. Now you will never forget how to pronounce my last name. So, which many people struggle with. So I'm sure Chris can relate. Nonetheless, my suggestion for all of you is that you adopt a mindset to keep sensitive data sacred. I think that's really, or other behaviors or mindsets within your organization. And that has to start at the top of the organization. The behaviors of the executive team are a big part of the equation as well. In terms of those day-to-day behaviors, there are plenty of helpers out there that can get you from where you are to where you need to be if you have those cultural issues. Of course, being able to handle the governance component of this cyber problem is something that I'm going to suggest that you consider all of the things that we discussed today, conducting a risk assessment, a legal regulatory impact review or assessment, as well as understand your current position. That's the starting point for all of this. And there are lots of different ways that the these different regulations can impact you beyond just getting hacked. So keep that in mind, that this could become a revenue blocker for you as well. Contracts and cascading supply chain enforcement, you're going to find yourself in situations where either if you're B2C, the consumer is, the public court of opinion is going to get you, or a B2B contract is going to get you. And we often see, that's going to be my piece of advice that we didn't talk about. What contracts did you sign? So that's a little, and see Rebecca, right? Because we run into it all the time.
Yeah.
Customer has to meet a regulation. We found out they've signed contracts, some of which put them in lots of trouble. They said that they are doing these things, but they're not.
Yeah.
So that's going to be my piece of advice for today.
Well, thank you all again, and thank you for all those who came today, and we will get this out as a replay. And again, we appreciate you all. And just work on your legally defensible position.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.